Welcome to the Mix Minus podcast. Matt McQueenie in studio with Tim Castano. We had to do this because things aren't looking too good for the New York Giants, are they, Tim?
No. I think when we last spoke, I said worst case scenario in a few weeks will be 2-3. Because right then we were speaking after the loss to the Redskins, and the optimism of the victories over the Cowboys and the Saints gave way to a little bit of concern after that sloppy Redskins loss. And then they were heading to Minnesota, which we knew was going to be very difficult, followed by Green Bay, also challenging. And here we are. We find ourselves at 2-3, and it's not a quiet 2-3 either.
No, it's almost unfair, too, with their team to have this kind of road trip. I heard Eli Manning with Mike Francesa, and he was saying that they only had one day to practice between the Monday night game in Minnesota and the Sunday night game in Green Bay with the travel and with when you come back. Excuses, but you don't really see that a lot where you have two kind of back-to-back weeks traveling to a night game.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't it last year that what was the team from the West that played the Giants and the Jets?
Right.
Was it the Raiders? No.
It's possible.
But and they just had to stay on the East Coast. And I kind of thought that with the Giants as well. It's like, should they just stay in the Midwest?
Well, it's not far enough to go.
It's not far enough, yeah. But it was like, what do they do? Yeah, who knows if that's what did it. But then, of course, there was a controversy following the Minnesota game with Odell Beckham Jr. Seemed to quiet down a little bit, given how he played on Sunday evening. But then we have Eric Flowers having his own brand of controversy yesterday.
The Beckham catch, as he tends to do, that was an unbelievable catch. That was one of the better touchdown catches I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was fantastic. And I think, who knows, but there were a couple of catches in Minnesota, had he made them, would have been pretty spectacular. And people were pointing to that last week, which is before we deride Odell Beckham Jr. too much. Let's just not forget that a couple of balls that were in his hands, if he caught them, we're having a different conversation about him. And that's exactly what happened, which is this week we're having a very different conversation about him because of a catch like he had in the end zone.
I've been thinking about the Giants, and their team doesn't seem to be constructed amazingly well. I think we like all the players who are the skill position players, but when the Giants won in the past, they had some kind of running game, and they had a tight end who could kind of be a safety valve or a main option, which could then allow the person on the outside, the wide receiver, to go deep and really play to Eli's strengths. Now they're relying so much on the outside that it's almost given me the feeling of the mid-2000s New Jersey Nets, where they had the big three of Jason Kidd, Vince Carter, and Richard Jefferson. And each year it would start, and they would write the NBA preview about, oh, this is a contender, but you really knew their ceiling was what the ceiling was. They weren't going to be able to play with the teams who have a dominant player down low. Many players who were on the wing were even better than the wing players they had. Mm-hmm. Now the NBA has obviously changed quite a bit, where the best team in the NBA now is pretty much a wing-dominated team with if we call Kevin Durant a wing player, he's a wacky player. But do you think that do you buy that analogy, and do you think that this Giants team is too oddly constructed to have consistency on the offensive end?
I do, but I think it's a good analogy. The only addendum I would make is that the NFL, they do have some rookies on their roster who, as the season goes on, could grow into productive roles. So you have a Paul Perkins who maybe not in week 4 or 5 is ready to produce the way Shane Vereen did, but he might give you that escape valve, say, in week 10. And I think I did hear Coach McAdoo say that, which is they do have some younger players whom they're expecting to mature as the season goes on and help fill in some of the gaps they've had because of injury. So whereas with the Nets, you're right, it was perimeter-oriented, but that was what you were going to get throughout the entire season because there wasn't anybody else on that roster who was going to get the minutes or grow into a role. Whereas here with the Giants, they do have some younger players who, if given the opportunity, might, as time goes on, begin to make up for some of the losses that they've had.
It's actually an interesting way to say it for the NFL. Can a team be too perimeter-oriented? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a team that comes to mind is the greatest show on turf, the Rams, from '99. However, what people always discount when thinking of that Rams team is Marshall Faulk. Yes, they had Isaac Bruce, they had Torrey Holt and Oz Hakeem, and Marshall Faulk was one of the best pass-catching backs ever, certainly that season. But he also was a terrific rusher, and so as perimeter-oriented as they were, and let's not forget they also had a fantastic offensive line with Orlando Pace and others. That was a terrific offensive line. So, yeah, I mean, a team can, I think, be too perimeter-oriented, because then you look at some of, going back even further, you could look at, say, Jerry Glanville's Houston Oilers teams, where it was just a run-and-shoot offense, and that was too perimeter-oriented. I mean, ahead of its time a little bit, but even today, I think that would be unsustainable in the NFL.
Well, and probably in the NBA, where the perimeter-oriented aspect comes back to bite you, is when you get tired legs and the game moves on and the shooting percentages come down when you're shooting from deep. And I think in the NFL, the analog is third down percentage. The Giants are, I think, 22nd in third down percentage at 37%, which almost sounds like a bad shooting percentage. And I think that's where they're hurting, because I'm having trouble figuring out. An NFL team is such a balance of the offense, defense, special teams, and sometimes it's just not so easy to pinpoint exactly what's going on. Is the defense's struggles to get to the quarterback because they are forced to be on the field for too long? I mean, that's an excuse too. Are these issues on the offense, when you look at such a high-powered team, are these issues on the offense something that is hurting the rest of the squad?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. To the defense, no, they did not get Aaron Rodgers. He had a lot of time to throw. But the bright side of that is their secondary played very well against Aaron Rodgers and against the Green Bay receivers. But yes, the offense, I think, last season it was a bit of the opposite predicament, where the offense seemed to be playing well, but the defense may have let them down a little bit, although you could argue that the offense let the defense down because at the end of games they weren't staying on the field long enough. I think the offense does seem a little rusty. There is something wrong. There's something wrong with just where the ball is going, how it's getting there, the play calling. And I think I said this maybe last year or the season. I think it was while watching the Minnesota game, and I was watching the game that they were calling, Norv Turner, the offensive sets he was calling. And I was like, why is it that something just seems wrong with our play calling when you look at it compared to the game plans of some other teams out there?
Yeah, and I wonder, too, if it's the head coach calling the plays. Is that a good thing? I know Mike McCarthy did it for years. He gave it up last year, took it back. Was that the thing that upset the balance with Green Bay? Is that something that no matter how much an offensive-oriented coach feels that that's where they can contribute to the team, is that really the best look? And I guess you can't be an offensive coordinator in a system like that because the head coach is always going to be looking over your back. But that is an issue. And at the end of the day, when you start talking about these things that have nothing to do with the playing on the field, then you're starting to make excuses. And I think the other piece here, we talked about this, the Washington game was the swing game. They win that game, they're playing with house money. They might even come across a little differently in one of these two games. They might play a little crisper if they don't have the downer of having lost that game. And then the NFL, you never know. You're looking at teams and going, well, this team's not good. They should have beat them. But then Washington comes back and wins the rest of the games since then. They're now 3-2, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an issue. And I think when you look at the difficulty of the schedule of the last 2 weeks, these are the kind of games, these are schedule losses. What did you think? Because these are two teams who are going to be in the running potentially at the end. Not as impressed with Green Bay probably, but they are finding a way to win, and they found a way to get 10 wins last year. There's something weird happening with their offense too. So if many people think that Aaron Rodgers is a better quarterback than Eli Manning, which is a consensus pick for that. Maybe he's different in the postseason, but as a regular season performer, he's sort of the equivalent of a 20-game winner in baseball. So there's something wrong with him. Sometimes these things happen, but I wasn't as impressed, though it's an expected win for Green Bay at home on a Sunday night. The Minnesota Vikings, as they stand now, are so unbelievably impressive that I think if the playoffs started right now, where they are. They're doing this without Adrian Peterson. They're doing it with Sam Bradford at the quarterback, who seems to have slotted in perfectly with this team, not making mistakes, but having it's like a really good Trent Dilfer almost, like really good. He's not making mistakes, but he's actually making plays. I was so impressed with Minnesota that it felt like they're on a different field than many of the teams they're playing, and that's hard to watch when you're a fan of a team. But I think I would come away with those two things from these two teams.
Yeah, and the silver lining for the Giants is they were in both games. I think the Green Bay game was a winnable game for them, despite some of the errors that they made and as sloppy as it looked at times. And even the Minnesota game, I didn't feel like the Giants played their best game and lost to Minnesota. I feel like they played a subpar game and still hung around for a little while until Minnesota put it away.
And made a terrible mistake on a drop. And we love Dwayne Harris. I mean, that was that's the kind of play. By the way, all these dreads are killing me. I can't tell the difference between the players. The dreads cover their shoulder pads, so you can't read the name. And you start going, is this Janoris Jenkins? Is this Dwayne Harris? That's a story for another day. But they made a critical mistake in that game. Like, they had to play a perfect game to even be in it. And they were close. It seemed like Minnesota was just default better, though. You know what I mean? Where they were going to do what they had to do if it got a little hot. And the Giants kind of gave it up to them on that one play. The Giants had really only one play that really drove it home for them on the little screen that went all the way. Yeah, that went all the way down. But they're just the kind of games they're sort of schedule losses. They're only probably one game off from where I thought they'd be at this point. That Washington game was a killer.
Mm-hmm.
They now face
Baltimore, and then the Rams in London,
and then the Rams,
which
in
is
London.
not a gimme.
No, I mean, I was looking at the schedule again. We thought they'd be 10-win team, but I honestly, unless things self-destructed to such a point, and it's always possible when you have a rookie head coach who's in over his head. Do we know if he's in over his head yet? No. Do we guess the way he sounds? The way his accent is kind of strange. It'd be really unfair to say, but I think if the Giants can get themselves righted to a degree, if they could figure out the running game, if they could get someone doing something, making catches, making better throws on the tight end aspect, if their defense can pick something up, it would be a travesty if they didn't win 9 games at this point.
I would agree with that, unless the wheels do fall off. Because their defensive spending in the offseason has paid dividends, not necessarily in terms of getting to the quarterback, but I think everyone would agree the defense does look better.
Well, and Jenkins won a game.
Yeah.
And running it back.
Yeah. So the defense definitely does look better. And there's enough talent, at least at the skill position on the offense, that they can figure things out schematically. I don't think anyone would say in the receiving core there's a talent deficit. Quite the opposite. Running backs, I do feel like the players they have on the roster can contribute what the players who are not playing right now can give you. I think that will just take a little bit of time, but I think they will. And the offensive line, it did collapse a lot against Green Bay. I've been more sanguine on the offensive line than most have. I don't know why, but I just feel like it is better than it may be producing right now. Well,
and the Green Bay front seven looks like it's a lot better.
It does, yeah. I mean, that was not seen as
a
strength.
Minnesota. I mean, this offensive line had to step into hostile territory against two of, at least from a front seven point of view, actually from a full-on defensive point of view, were two very formidable teams.
Yeah, and I think a remark I made after the Redskins game was that how the team responded to that loss would say a lot about Ben McAdoo as a head coach and early on, and how would he get that team focused and motivated. And unfortunately, they lost both games. So again, I mean, in the NFL, there are 16 games. Each one is critical. We're at another critical one, going up against Baltimore. And it'll be, again, a test of McAdoo early in his tenure to determine if he can get this team. You're right, Baltimore probably does not match up as well as Minnesota, and probably not as well as Green Bay, and they're back at home. Can he right the ship? Well,
Baltimore they're actually ranked 6th overall right now. on Pro Football Focus's rankings, and they're third on defense.
I take back what I said.
This is where you don't know. This is where the trenches, the type of stuff gets you. And you don't know who. They didn't have a great schedule for the first couple of games with how it turned out. So a lot of these things end up being skewed early on. But the Giants and Baltimore actually have a similar feel in my mind. You have a franchise quarterback in place. They both had sort of magical runs to Super Bowls. They both might be a little bit inconsistent on a day-to-day basis in season. Their numbers will catch up to where they are. Joe Flacco actually did get hurt, so that team got to see what life is like without that quarterback who you might think is inconsistent, but you go, wow, I'll take that any day of the year. They each have legacy, history, championship play, and they're both sort of at the same kind of thing where they've maybe let things down. The last game, that Baltimore loss was pretty good. They've lost two. I believe they started 3-0 and they've lost.
They did,
the last
They
two.
lost to the Raiders and then they lost this week.
But you're at home. You're the Giants coming off of 2 games. This is a game you have to win this. There's just no way. It would be nice if you got some separation in a win. I don't know if the Giants are going to be nice enough to do that, but the Rams look like a different team, although maybe they don't after the last game. If they're not playing Arizona or Seattle, then they might just be the Rams, although they did play Tampa Bay very well. But we don't even know what Tampa Bay is. This is the hard part of it's a moving target across the board. How did you watch this game up against the debate?
I did not watch the debate.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because you're with her?
Well, I have made up my mind as to my vote quite a while ago, and I didn't even watch the last debate either. I think
is it because it's so uncomfortable? Like this is not how the discourse is supposed to be.
It's uncomfortable. It's unnerving, and I just did not want to necessarily subject myself to that type of aggravation. So
it's like a horror movie. Like sometimes you just don't want to see it.
You don't, and I don't have the self-discipline to say I'll just watch a little bit and then I'll turn it off. Then I would be, it would snag me, and I didn't think it would be good for me. I didn't necessarily think it was good for the country, so I didn't think it would be good for me either.
Do you follow up after it to see how it went, or do you even just like stay away from it? Doesn't matter.
I'm paying less and less attention, just especially after what happened over the weekend. Just it's so salacious, and it's. You just once you see or hear something, you can't see or unhear it, and so I am trying to keep my distance. I did hear some of the, I did read some of the post-debate analysis, and for whatever that's worth, it's worth.
It almost doesn't matter. It's professional wrestling, really, in the moment.
Which, by the way, there was a professional wrestling pay-per-view on that evening.
Is that right?
Yes, there was. So that probably was a little more dignified and courteous in its execution than the debate.
And I also think it's a little unfair the way things are going that that Hillary Clinton is being equated to Donald Trump just by the very nature of this being an election. And they couldn't be any further in how you equate things. And I think there's a difficulty with someone who might be voting for her, whether that's by default, whether it's by protest against that man can never be in there. But she's had a pretty good career.
Yeah.
There's some crazy things that have happened, but it's politics.
What's interesting is I actually, when I think of Donald Trump's candidacy, I don't necessarily even think of it in contrast to Hillary Clinton. I think of it in contrast to Mitt Romney.
He was a much better candidate at this point.
A fantastic candidate. And you don't know what you have until it's gone. How much better were we 4 years ago when having a campaign between President Obama and Mitt Romney, and that's my it just is it's disheartening to think that, and even prior to that, John McCain, and then now we have this, which is
it's a farce, basically.
It's just unfortunate, and I remember growing up a little bit, and I think each of us can remember maybe the first presidential election that we really paid attention to, and so there's a generation that this is going to be their first exposure to national politics, and that's kind of unfortunate.
It's it's just got to end because it's opening up a breach basically in all that is polite and good in any kind of way that it's unfortunate that there are literally records of people saying certain things across social media. Thank goodness for you, you're not on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a shocking aspect when you see people, you're like, oh my gosh, I knew this person. I was friends with them. What are they saying? I'm intrigued by the psychology. How did this get into them? Was it always there, dormant, latent? Has something happened in their life where things have turned and they're looking for something that maybe they're missing? It's fascinating. Yet this is the kind of stuff we would read about that was happening in other countries. This is Italy with Berlusconi. This is South American dictator type of stuff where if he ever won, I mean, literally what happened, I think, what's the guy in South America who basically runs the government by Twitter? Is it Peru? I forget which one it is, but Santos maybe. I could be getting it wrong, but this guy was being come after by people on Twitter, and he was all there when someone would say my road needs to be paved, and then he would like mention the mayor. Which is insane. Someone came after him who had a real following, and what this guy did was he went on TV and had a press conference to the nation and announced who this guy was, outed him who he was, told people where he lived, who his wife was, who his family was, and then everyone should go like egg his house and give him trouble. And then they were like following him when he'd go on vacation, and then sending pictures to him of him being on vacation. Like, I have no doubt, and people think this is all fun and games. I think Donald Trump would do stuff like that.
Yeah, and just thinking back to a lot of the candidates we've had recently, so Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, how do we reconcile those individuals with the current individual? I just don't know. I don't know. I don't have children, but I wouldn't know how to explain to them that we once had individuals of a certain caliber and a certain demeanor and class requesting our vote and positioning themselves for this office, and now we're dealing with this, and it's just really unfortunate overall.
Yeah, I heard someone talking about the fact how funny it is that we look back at debates of yore, and people would have a twit fit about Al Gore sighing or Ronald Reagan rolling his eyes. Like that was a breach of etiquette in former debates. Mm-hmm. And now we have somebody saying, if I'm the president, I'm going to put you in jail, to the other. He actually said that to Hillary Clinton. I
did get that from the post-debate.
Metal cages and all this. And I had read, and I love how this morphed because we'll finish on the NFL, but I had read the New Yorker article maybe from last week or the week before about Trump County, basically. It was like dispatches from Trump County in West Virginia. And the really scary thing was you build up in your mind this shorthand that the people who are voting for him are a certain way that fits a certain template. They're angry about race. They're angry about women coming up and being more equal in the world. They're angry that they're being left behind. It's all anger, anger, anger. And I was shocked in this article that it didn't seem to be that at all, and that the people were coming at Trump from a different angle. They were almost pushing to the side the bad things he said as just the price of him being in the campaign and having to run a certain way. Although I'm shocked that he never moderated, because I thought that was going to be the easiest thing in the world for him to do and win votes by becoming moderate the minute he won. And he didn't do it, so maybe he really has these things in his head and in his heart. But they were saying that, look, of course you say build a wall. That's what you do in a negotiation. No one's going to get a wall, but you'll get much further along in a negotiation if you go crazy. If you say this $10 million building is $20 million, maybe you end up at 13 and you make 3. So they were actually coming at it from a pragmatic point of view, and I was completely. It shook me a little bit because I was thinking to myself, boy, there's way more of the country that's like this with pockets of voters than are like the coasts potentially. And if there's that disaffection in one place, it's sort of like with the housing crisis when they said, well, no, the whole housing market is safe because regions are diversified. But really, it was all the same companies giving the same mortgages, and they were all tied on one string to each other. There wasn't any like regionalization that gave you diversification. It was like, no, if one's in Florida go down, Vegas goes, parts of California go, Arizona goes, and it was all across the board. And I wonder if there truly is, I don't know if they're called the silent majority now because they're very loud, but I wonder if there's this weird sleeping, lurking majority that could find a way to get him in. Maybe popular, he could get real close, but it's terrible to say, but I'm hoping that the big business of government is good enough to fight that off with the Electoral College, and how it's a game in the Electoral College and that a mass of people can't beat that game.
I have been wrong about with every observation I've made about this election, so anything I would say at this point, I'd have absolutely no confidence in it.
I know. That's
I mean, I'm going to be interested in reading some of the postscript, which I'm sure will be delved into for years and years and years as to...
Well, how about the game change for this election when that book comes out?
Exactly. And
do they even have access?
There is, I think, some... You read some of it, the ongoing analysis of the electorate and what they're going through, what they're experiencing, and I think we're missing something. Something is not woven into the narrative of this election just yet, and I'd be interested to see what that is. And we may not know for quite some time, but anything I could say at this point more than likely would be incorrect.
It's very scary because you follow this stuff for a long time. You read every day. You read every day for years, and it's like thrown on its head. It's like the upside down world in Stranger Things, and you're just sitting there going, these are the kind of tectonic shifts people talk about in history. Mm-hmm. And is it a tectonic shift towards something that really is dying out? I mean, it's frightening that that could happen, but that's what voting is about. And if enough people do it, that's the popular sentiment and majority. And wow, yeah, it could get there. So on that note, because that came off of... Did you even watch it? No, you were watching the Giants. And a lot of the watching of football seems to have been affected by this. It's actually very similar. Mm-hmm. No one can explain what's happening with the football ratings, just as no one can sort of explain what's happening with this whole...
Yeah, and I've heard the theories, and oversaturation, backlash to some of the health issues of the players, just... multiplication of options beyond just football, just be able to digest a certain number of games through a different medium within a short period of time, so you feel like you're connected to the league, but not necessarily having to follow your team. There's a lot, and who knows what it is. I mean, I've heard the theories on talk radio.
What if it's woven? What if it's all part of the same story?
That would be interesting. It could be.
And how about the fact that Donald Trump was the guy who took the USFL down? This is his final. This is all really just about football. This isn't the country. This is making up for lost time with the USFL.
And going back to wrestling, he did once participate in wrestling as well. So.
He did. Didn't he beat up Vince McMahon or something?
I don't know.
I thought he was in a chair or something. He was beating him. I
don't know. I wasn't watching at that point, but
nothing touches him. That's the scary. That's the thing. There's nothing that could come out that does anything. No amount of legislators and congressmen and House members who say stuff. How many times has Paul Ryan been in, been out, been in, been out? It's like the Donald Brexit.
Well, even with George H.W. Bush, the father, did not necessarily come out and endorse Hillary Clinton, but there's a report that he will, in fact, vote for her. Maybe in a different election cycle that would have... I mean, because George H.W. Bush, whatever you might think of him, is a fantastic American, and he was, like Hillary Clinton, incredibly well prepared for the role given his track record. And
if you're a one-term president, you actually probably did something right.
Yeah, and I mean, I have absolutely nothing bad to say about George H.W. Bush whatsoever. I think he's a terrific president. But in a different election cycle, that move by him probably would have a greater impact than it did. But it may register with some people, certain segments, but it's not going to, I think, really move the needle too much.
Does Glenn Beck? Because he just came out today, I think, and said that he's with her.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which is kind of, you just don't know what works or what doesn't anymore. There's a very strange there's a strange path with this whole candidate that is just making people turn to their darkest selves and just almost vote in spite of themselves and as a protest against themselves, cutting the nose to spite the face. It's amazing, and it couldn't be any more pervasive, the sentiment that he's not right, he's not. But this is the people going, well, no, this is my one chance to tell you you're wrong.
Yes, yeah, and I think there may be a tendency in the media, now, I don't mean to use the media under one umbrella, but to demonize some of the supporters of Donald Trump.
Sure.
I don't believe that as a constructive exercise, because I don't believe that then gets us to whatever the legitimate concerns are. Among a certain number of them, there may be illegitimate concerns which will not and cannot be addressed, but among another percentage of them, there in fact are some legitimate concerns, and that's being obfuscated right now by just the vitriol. And that's why I think maybe we'll learn more when this is all settled, and there can be some dispassionate analysis of what actually is going on. But I don't necessarily know if we get very far with demonizing the electorate in this regard. Like, oh, they're
right.
so stupid because they're following this, and vice versa. Why?
Yeah.
I mean, why are they? How can you elect a liar? Or why are you blind to this? And that is not getting our country anywhere.
No. And this could just be the one point in time where this one individual, it's almost like the Gladwell antimatter story, the perfect time, the perfect person, at a point where he can kind of change the narrative of everything. And that could have been it. But let's quickly run through some thoughts as we head into this new week, which is NFL Week 6 already. So the Broncos head into San Diego for a Thursday night game, which is just another one of these games that's not amazingly interesting. I could imagine that the last game that the Broncos just lost in Denver to Atlanta is sort of when the chicken gets its head cut off, where it just falls. I could see them going in the wrong direction now, where they're buoyed by this positive energy of winning, and now it could fall off. And I could, with as much as the Chargers have been in all these games, I could see them beating the Broncos on a Thursday night game.
Interesting. And Gary Kubiak will not be on the sideline.
The migraines, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could happen. I mean, that's Thursday. That's what Thursday night games are for.
Yeah, especially being the team who has to travel, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is true, because that's. I mean, we look at the Houston getting beat as badly as they did in that game when they had to go to. When you have to travel, crazy things could happen. But I could see that hurt that narrative. The 49ers play the Bills. How about the fact that the Bills should be 4-2 after this game? They're an 8-point favorite against the 49ers, who will probably not play Kaepernick, even though they probably should, which would be fun. You would have Kaepernick going against intense Donald Trump supporter Rex Ryan. Causing friction across locker rooms in America. But yeah, that's pretty amazing that the Bills could be 4-2.
That, especially since preseason I had them getting 4 wins overall. So shows you what I know.
I think I might have had. I think I was still on the under. But then we got the Eagles at the Redskins, an NFC East showdown. The Eagles finally lost. That was only by 1 point. I had picked Detroit, but they were like a 3-point favorite, I think. So by winning by 1, that hurt me. The Eagles probably did not play an amazing game there, and they were still right in it. And this team might be really good. This just might be a really good team. Their rankings are outstanding. They've beaten good teams, and you wonder if there's a wall that's hit for Wentz, and that's the only thing that could kind of slow him down, where he needs to get ready for a future season by getting used to this season. But I don't. It's hard for me to tell, actually. Their defense is very good, and their offense is very good.
It is, yeah. And there was an article in Sports Illustrated talking about a little bit, they alluded to the Giants' head coaching decision with Ben McAdoo, and the Eagles choosing Doug Peterson, because it was rumored that the Eagles were interested in Ben McAdoo, and just contrasting the decisions that each head coach has made.
And Tom Coughlin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And contrasting the decisions that each head coach has made during the season and where it has left them. So I only raise that to say that author, at least, was quite complimentary of how Peterson has done with handling Wentz.
Yeah. I mean, the Eagles, they're a very good team, and it was just hidden by some injuries and and lackluster play at certain points. But again, we talk about the fact that they beat New England in New England last year. So they had a good base. They're a good team, and I'm in shock when you think about the fact the Redskins have a better record than the Giants now. When you look at that pivot game, they came into that game. Giants are 2-0. They're 0-2. They win that game. They go on a roll. The Giants lose that game, and they kind of roll off. But again, we can look at this pocket of those two games when we get later in the season and just say, hey, those are sort of schedule losses where you would have to play. If they were in the running where they needed to win a game, I'd love to see the Giants later in the season have to play one of those places, in one of those cities. It's an early season loss. You have the pumped up crowd in Minnesota. That was their first. Was that their first home game or was that their second? I forget. But it was early on in the run of that.
I think that was their second.
Yeah, it was in that stadium. The Browns at the Titans. The Browns are a fun 0-5 team. It's really fun to watch Terrell Pryor play. But man, 5 or 6 quarterbacks at this point, it doesn't change. The Titans have played better than I thought they would. They're really good running the ball. Mariota's a good quarterback. They're 2-3. They should beat this team. They should be 3-3 at that point. But DeMarco Murray's been very good after his little stint in Philadelphia last year. He's kind of gotten back to what he was. We talked about the Ravens and the Giants. Panthers at Saints. Wow. 1-4 versus 1-3.
Yeah, 1-3, yeah.
Now, I think the Panthers are more in the mold of... So it doesn't happen a lot where you're 1-4 and you get to the playoffs. But last year it did. You had the Chiefs and you had the Texans. And the Chiefs lost this game, technically, to go to 1-5. I still think the Panthers get to 10 wins. They're still a really good team.
Well, and the Panthers have a history of that, which is 2 seasons ago, when people were thinking Ron Rivera would be fired mid-season, and he brought them back and got them to the playoffs.
That's right.
So they're definitely a resilient bunch, and they have a head coach who's been there before, so he's not going to crack under pressure like this. Newton's got to come back. I watched some of the game with Derek Anderson.
He lost them the game.
He did, yeah. I mean, I kind of felt while watching him that that's a player, if he'd gotten another couple of games, probably could have won that game. There was not a lot of touch on his balls. There was too much velocity. So, but they need Cam Newton back, obviously.
I see a parallel between the Panthers this year at the start and the Seahawks last year. They both lost the Seahawks in a much more heartbreaking fashion. But with what was expected of the Panthers doing what they did, only having one loss to that point, they had it handed to them in that game. I mean, that was a drubbing. So whether it's a drubbing or whether it's a heartbreaking loss, I think there's a hangover. Plus you get a tougher schedule, obviously, being a top team. And if you remember, the Seahawks started 0-2, 2-4, and they were 4-5. And they fell to 2-4 after losing to Carolina, coming into Seattle and beating them. So I think from that point of view, that was a Seattle team that got to 10 wins as well, while being 4-5. The Panthers have the infrastructure to get this done. They're probably looking at the Josh Norman, letting go Josh Norman now and saying to themselves, maybe we were not the smartest people in the room to just do that. Probably just this year at least. And when you think about the fact they were planning on keeping him. So if you're planning on keeping him, it's probably a different story than if you're planning on letting him go, how you assemble your secondary. So they should be fine. It's a bad hole to be in. The Saints found a way to beat San Diego, and San Diego, that might be their moment. That team's not going to have a lot of wins. I think we said 4 or 5. Wow, Jaguars, Bears, that's a tough one. I feel like only the Bears could probably make the Jaguars look really good at this time. The crazy thing with the Jaguars is that their defensive statistics are pretty abysmal.
Really?
Yeah, they are. Where is it here? I think it was total defense. They were in like the lower. So first of all, points per game is it's a good number to look at for obvious reasons. And how about you have Minnesota giving up 12.6 points a game, Philadelphia 12.8. But where's our friends? Jacksonville, 25th in the league. They're giving up 28 points per game. I mean, they're bending and breaking, I guess you'd say. That is not headed for a pretty place, I think. There's just one more loss. I mean, they were really saved by only beating the Dolphins, which are their own problem. The Dolphins just look really quite ugly what they're doing now too. The Bears they're almost an unwatchable team. For some reason, Chicago teams to me are unwatchable in all their sports. I don't know why, except maybe the Cubs this year. I'll root for the Cubs, I think. But there's something about Chicago, maybe because it's foreign to me. It's one city I've never been to, which is a strange thing, having been to almost every place in the country. It's like foreign. I just don't. There's not a lot I like about Chicago. Sorry, guys. The Rams at the Lions is an interesting game.
That is interesting.
The Lions are a 3.5-point favorite right now, which is a hard bet. The Rams have gone across the country and won the game at 1, because I think that was the Tampa Bay game, the one that had the lightning storm late and they ended. So that whole body clock thing, I don't know where I stand on that anymore.
And they have to go to London next week.
They have to go to London next week, all the way from L.A. But the Lions win when they shouldn't, and they never cover, or they backdoor and cover and wreck you on the big cover. The Rams are such a wild card right now. They feel like they're in one of those ruts where they could lose 3 or 4 in a row and then have to be thinking about playing golf. But that's you almost don't want to put your life on any of those teams. Steelers at Dolphins. The Steelers should destroy the Dolphins. They're a 7.5-point favorite on the road. The Dolphins are in a really bad position because they have a lot of money spent on players. They have a lot of names, and the problem is they don't have a quarterback. So they're going to have to kind of restart things.
Do a fire sale. However you can do a fire sale in the NFL.
And I guess Gase wasn't the magic elixir for that quarterback, which, it's not his fault. He always looks like he's paranoid, the way his eyes are. You notice that?
I haven't watched them closely.
Yeah, he's like looking around.
There are 2 really good games, I think, though.
Bengals-Patriots?
I was actually thinking Chiefs-Raiders and Falcons-Seahawks.
Those are usually you don't get the 4 o'clock games being good.
Mm-hmm.
I've been having trouble, maybe because of having a 2-year-old, but I've been having trouble with the stamina. You almost have to choose your window, Like especially when you have the England game and it's starting at 9 in the morning. By the time you're getting to like the 4 o'clock games, you're just like, oh man, I'm tired. But those are really good. I could see the Raiders losing that game. It's an even line, which is kind of crazy, being a team who's 4-1 at home. Raiders are letting up a lot of points. They're in the high 20s, I believe. Atlanta's letting up a lot of points, but they've scored 5 more points per game than the next in line, but they've given up like 28. Same thing with the Raiders. These teams who are giving up a lot, they either got to clean things up, or that's going to come back to bite them when things get a little cold. The Falcons going to the Seahawks, this is one of those games where you're going to learn a lot, although it's one of those games also that's unfair to say that because they've already gone and won in Oakland. Mm-hmm. They've won in Denver. They're allowed a mulligan too here. So that will be something that bears watching, but it will be interesting because the Seahawks really should be able to do a lot on the offensive end, and we're going to be able to see how this Falcons offense goes against a top secondary. But actually, like the one point I want to make on the Bengals, look at how much talent left the Bengals offense. First of all, Eifert hasn't played, but how about Marvin Jones like leading the league almost in receiving or up there because Julio Jones had like the 300-yard game, so you can't really do much there. But how about losing Marvin Jones, losing Mohamed Sanu, who's been a really good secondary option with Atlanta. They've almost lost too much. It's almost not fair at this point to be like, well, they'll just keep regenerating and being fine. When talent leaves and they become number 1 options, number 2 options in other places, that hurts AJ Green because now there's not somebody to kind of keep the attention off of him. So that's a tough thing, and you see the Falcons and Detroit getting the positive aspects of that. That is really kind of offset in a way, missing Calvin Johnson. Cowboys and Packers is going to be real interesting because it's one of those games where you got to see what the Giants did, and now if Dallas goes in there and beats the Packers like 28-14, you're just going to go, this is not cool.
Well, it'll be interesting to see their offensive line against Green Bay's defensive front.
That's right, and they should have no problem. I mean, that's a top offensive line, and a lot of people are saying, obviously, it's Tony Romo's team. A part of me would probably make the hard decision, let this guy, until he just has like 2 terrible games, let this guy go. I don't care if I upset a 36-year-old quarterback who's been this hurt this often. Dak Prescott, from the minute he walked into the NFL in preseason, and we wanted to kind of like downplay preseason because it is what it is, he's looked like the same exact guy from preseason to now. He is so comfortable. That's because of the line as well and having a great running back. But he is so comfortable and poised in the pocket that there's just something about his easygoing character there. And people saying, "Oh, he can't go deep." I bet he can go deep. I think if they wanted to open it up, he could go deep. But there's a part of me that just wouldn't mess with this right now.
Well, it's interesting because what's better for Dak Prescott? Meaning, is it better to have Dak Prescott perhaps go to the bench for a non-performance related reason to bring Tony Romo back and then see how it goes, as opposed to ride Dak Prescott out? Maybe he does stumble a little bit, then you pull him and put in Tony Romo. That may affect Prescott's career moving forward more than it would, say, Romo's career at this point, because Romo has played more games than he will in the future, whereas that's not the case with Prescott. So that's just a consideration.
I wonder if Tony has, like, how long can you go without playing meaningful football at this age, though, before you go off a cliff? And the one thing with Prescott, at least from what I've seen, and I know people can say, oh, they're building a team, they're only allowing him to control certain things. He looks so confident and comfortable that I almost wonder if the opposite happens, where you put someone in and then he's just like, he loses a little bit of that. I mean, he's in control of this team. Like, the Des Bryant's not even playing these couple of games. And what's up with those, like, cut off sweatshirt? I mean, that was weird. But I would just be, I know you want to reward the guy who's been there, but it's actually funny. So Tom Brady obviously upends as a later pick Drew Bledsoe through a pretty gruesome injury, which the Tony Romo almost looks, he didn't get hit that amazingly hard, but it's like, he's so breakable now. He's so fragile. Didn't Drew Bledsoe
lose his job in Dallas to Tony Romo?
To Tony Romo.
Yes.
It's very funny like that. So, yeah, if they win in Green Bay, or if it's very close, then they have a bye, and then I think Romo's supposed to. I got to look at the schedule. I don't know though, and I was very down on this rookie quarterback thing. This whole thing's upended this year. Wentz, Prescott. I would.
Simeon's essentially a rookie.
That's right. Yeah, it's very tough, which leads you to the Colts Texans. The Texans don't win that game, and Brock Osweiler doesn't do a lot. Whew, that's a lot of guaranteed millions for a quarterback with a quarterback coach, who is just, that's a little scary. And then
you have two very highly paid quarterbacks going up against each other in that game.
That's
after
true.
After what the GM Grigson said this week about being unable to build the defense because
that was a tough. Oh, how do you say that?
Yeah,
that's thin skin type of stuff. That's Trumpian. Saw Kaepernick will start. They've announced he will start against the Bills. So that actually could even the line a little bit, because you haven't seen Kaepernick play a while. What if Chip Kelly's had him in the lab, like getting him back? Mm-hmm.
That's the right call.
It's going to be, that could be good. That could be trouble for the Bills, actually. And then last off, the Jets, the 1-4 Jets against the 2-3 Cardinals. Very similar looking teams, very similar looking issues. A quarterback who had a career year who is falling off.
Bowles coaching against his old team.
And unfortunately, Arizona's a 7.5 point favorite at home on Monday night. I think the Jets are probably still without Revis. They're without Decker. Not that it even matters at this point. If Revis, the way things have looked, the Jets I think are going to be 1-5, and it's to get the one win they did against Buffalo is amazing. But you can't say that it's unexpected to be 1-5, and then they're just going to have to fight out of the hole the way that Kansas City did, and you just hope your schedule is open to being able to do that. Although they still have 2 New England games to play.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's going to be one of those years for the Jets. Well, at least now they'll get a better draft pick, and they'll have a little bit of an easier schedule next year. Because the Cardinals are, it's going to be interesting to see who comes out of this game and how it transpires. So, have you been watching baseball?
I have not.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
I saw last night I saw the final game there. Wow, to be swept, and then the good night Poppy, and then for Terry Francona to be the one there.
I know.
To do it. It's amazing. All right. Well, we thought we'd do shorter, but it was pretty long. So, actually, only 50 minutes. You feel good?
I do. Feels good.
Cool. All right.